I've written this as a commentary-style royal analysis rather than presenting rumors as established facts. It uses storytelling, personal observations, rhetorical questions, and the exact CTA you requested. Writing. The real reason Leonor is distancing Her Majesty from her inner circle. There was a moment recently that caught my attention. Not a speech, not a headline, not even an official announcement. Just a look, a brief, almost forgettable moment where Princess Leonor appeared completely comfortable stepping forward on her own while several familiar royal figures seemed noticeably absent from the spotlight around her. And honestly, the more I thought about it, the more I started asking myself a question. What if the biggest story in the Spanish royal family right now isn't what Leonor is doing, but who she's slowly choosing not to do it with? Because sometimes distance isn't created by conflict. Sometimes distance is created by growth. And I think that's exactly what we're watching unfold. For years, Leonor's public image has been carefully protected, carefully managed, and carefully guided by people around her. But now, the future Queen of Spain appears to be entering a completely different phase. A phase where she isn't just following advice. She's creating her own identity. And that changes everything. If you're new to Leonor's story, subscribe, I post every day. Because the story we're following isn't really about royal gossip. It's about watching a future queen learn how to lead while the entire world watches every move she makes. Now here's where things get interesting. When most people hear the phrase, inner circle, they immediately think of palace advisors, family members, longtime friends, and trusted figures around the monarchy. But I think the real conversation is much bigger than that. The question isn't whether Leonor is pushing people away. The question is whether she is preparing herself to stand independently. And those are two very different things. Think about it. Every future monarch eventually reaches a moment where they must stop being someone's daughter and start becoming a sovereign in their own right. King Charles faced it. Prince William is facing it. And now Leonor may be facing it too. The transition is never comfortable. Because the people who helped build your path are not always the people who walk beside you forever. That's not betrayal. That's evolution. And I think that's where many observers are misunderstanding what's happening. Because when we see Leonor taking on more responsibility, attending events with growing confidence, and projecting a more independent image, some people automatically assume there's tension behind the scenes. Maybe, maybe not. Personally, I think the simpler explanation is often the correct one. Leonor is growing up, and growth changes relationships. Here's my hot take. I don't believe the palace is trying to create distance for the sake of distance. I think they're trying to create legitimacy. There's a difference. The Spanish monarchy understands something extremely important. When Leonor eventually becomes queen, nobody will ask whether her advisors were popular. Nobody will ask whether her image team was effective. People will ask one question. Can she lead? That's it. Everything else becomes secondary. And that's why every public appearance matters. Every military assignment matters. Every speech matters. Every moment where she stands alone matters. Because each one sends a message. The future queen is being tested. Not formally, not officially, but publicly, and those tests never stop. What's fascinating is how different Leonor's journey feels compared to other young royals. Look at Prince William. Much of his preparation happened gradually over decades. Look at Catherine. Her public role expanded carefully over time. But Leonor's path feels compressed. Faster. More intense. Almost like the monarchy understands that modern audiences don't wait anymore. Today's public wants authenticity. They want action. They want visible proof. And that brings me to something I think people overlook. Military training. The military training isn't just about military skills. It's branding. And before anyone gets upset by that word, hear me out. I don't mean fake branding. I mean credibility. The training tells Spaniards something important. Leonor isn't asking for leadership. She's preparing for it. And preparation earns respect. You know what this reminds me of? A startup founder. Seriously, stay with me. When a company is young, everyone talks about the team around the founder. The advisors, the investors, the mentors. But eventually the founder must prove they can lead without leaning on those names. That's the stage Leonor seems to be entering. Her name must become the story, not the people around her. And I think that's why some observers are sensing distance. Not because relationships are collapsing, but because attention is shifting. There's another angle here that I find even more interesting. The media. Why are we hearing these discussions now? Why is there suddenly so much focus on Leonor's independence? My personal theory. Because independence is easier to sell than stability. Headlines love conflict, headlines love drama, headlines love the idea that someone is breaking away from someone else. But reality is usually more complicated. And frankly, more boring. The reality might simply be that Leonor is doing exactly what future monarchs are expected to do. Gradually establish authority, gradually establish confidence, gradually establish trust. The problem is that gradual changes don't generate clicks. Conflict does. And that's why I always try to ask one question whenever a royal story explodes. Who benefits from this narrative? Because that question often reveals more than the story itself. Now let me share something I've noticed. The strongest leaders often disappoint people during periods of growth. Not because they're cruel, not because they're arrogant, but because growth requires boundaries. And boundaries create distance. Think about your own life. Have you ever outgrown a role? A friendship? An expectation? Did everyone celebrate your growth? Probably not. Some people likely felt left behind. That's human nature, which is why royal transitions are so fascinating. They magnify normal human experiences on a global stage. What Leonor is experiencing may look unique, but in many ways it's incredibly relatable. She's navigating expectations, she's navigating responsibility, and she's navigating the difficult reality that becoming who you're meant to be sometimes changes your relationships. There's also the question of Queen Letizia. And I think this is where people often rush to conclusions. A daughter becoming more independent doesn't automatically mean a mother is losing influence. Those are not the same thing. In fact, successful parenting often leads to exactly this outcome. Independence, confidence, self-reliance. Could there be disagreements? Of course. Every family has them. Every family, even royal ones. But disagreement and division are not synonyms. And that's an important distinction. As I watch Leonor's public evolution, I don't see someone rejecting guidance. I see someone absorbing years of guidance and finally putting it into practice. That's a completely different story. And honestly, it's a much more interesting story. Because it's about transformation, not conflict. The hidden cost, however, is significant. The more independent Leonor becomes, the less room she has for mistakes. That's the trade-off. Greater authority means greater scrutiny. Greater visibility means greater pressure. Every future queen eventually discovers that freedom and responsibility arrive together. You don't get one without the other. And I suspect Leonor is learning that lesson right now. So when people ask why she appears to be creating distance from her inner circle, my answer is simple. Maybe she's not creating distance at all. Maybe she's creating space. Space to lead. Space to grow. Space to become the figure Spain will one day look to for stability and continuity. And if that's what's happening, then what we're witnessing isn't a royal split. It's a royal transition. A very important difference. Because history shows us something fascinating. The strongest monarchs aren't remembered for who stood beside them. They're remembered for who they became when they finally stood on their own. And perhaps that's the real story unfolding right in front of us. Not a story about separation. Not a story about conflict. But a story about preparation. The preparation of a future queen. And if my reading of the situation is correct, the most important chapter of Leonor's journey may only be beginning now. What do you think? Are we watching genuine distance emerge within royal circles? Or are we simply witnessing the natural transformation of a young woman preparing for one of the most demanding roles in Europe? Personally, I think the answer says just as much about our expectations of leaders as it does about Leonor herself. Did you like this feature?